Good evening, everyone. Today I am continuing with the new unit, Biopsychology. And in the previous class, I taught you about the neurons. So, this is under this nervous system, this new chapter or unit. Now, in this unit, I will explain in detail about the brain, that means the whole part of the central nervous system. And as you all know, that central nervous system, it consists of the spinal cord. And in this unit I will cover the structure of spinal cord as well as the functions of the spinal cord, and also the different types or different parts of the brain, that is the telencephalon or the cerebral cortex, then the telencephalon or basal ganglia, telencephalon, that is the limbic system, and diencephalon, that is a thalamus and hypothalamus. So in detail I will explain you about the midbrain, the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. And the midbrain, it consists of the tectum and the tegmentum, while the hindbrain, it consists of the cerebellum, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Now, the other parts of this unit, it covers mainly the lobes of the central nervous system, where it that is the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, and the occipital and insula. So, these parts are the lobes of the central nervous system, as well as the brain processes which related to the consciousness, as well as the disorders of the central nervous system. What are the disorders? Like the famous disease, that is well known disease, that is Alzheimer's disease or the Parkinson's disease, or stroke, or multiple sclerosis, or any cerebral palsy, etc. So all of these disorders, as well as the functions of the brain and the different parts of the brain, as well as the structure and functions of the spinal cord, is covered in this unit. Now, as the central nervous system, it mainly, as you all know, that nervous system is responsible for all our behaviors and the thought processes, the thinking, perception, memory, learning, etc. So the nervous system of the humans has two major divisions. What are they? They are the central nervous system or CNS, and the peripheral nervous system or the PNS. Now, the central nervous system, the parts which are under this central nervous system umbrella, that covers mainly the brain and the spinal cord, and it contains the relay nerves, neurons, that is the interneurons. I told you when I was explaining the neurons that the interneurons are the neurons that connects between two neurons. Now, the peripheral nervous system or PNS, it is composed of the cranial nerves, the spinal nerves, the peripheral nerves, and it contains the sensory neurons as well as the motor neurons. So these are the neurons that covers the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Now, the central nervous system, it comprises mainly the brain and the spinal cord that I told you. Now, the PNS is further subdivided into two parts. Now, or two somatic nervous system. What are they? They are the SNS or the somatic nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system, that is the ANS, that I will explain you in detail. Now, this is the main subdivisions of this central nervous system, or the components of the human nervous system. Now, I will tell you in brief that the central nervous system, it mainly consists of the brain and the spinal cord, as well as the integrative control center. It is the main center or the integrative center of our body. And the peripheral nervous system or the PNS, it is the it consists of the cranial and the spinal nerves, and the communication between the CNS and the body is controlled by this PNS or the peripheral nervous system. Now, this peripheral nervous system is again divided into two parts. They are the sensory or the afferent divisions and the motor or the efferent divisions. Now, the sensory or the afferent divisions is composed of the sensory neurons, and it conducts mainly the signals from the receptors to CNS, while the motor or the efferent neurons, it composed of the motor neurons, number one, and number two, the it conducts the signals from the CNS to the efferent effectors. Now then, this motor or this efferent division, it again, it may be divided into two parts. They are the ANS or the autonomic nervous system and the SNS, that is the somatic nervous system. Now, this autonomic nervous system, the main function of this ANS is to control the involuntary responses of our body. And the somatic nervous system, it controls all the voluntary movements of our body. As you all know, that soma means the body. So, it controls all the voluntary movement that we can control ourselves. So these are the main functions of SNS. Now, this ANS or the autonomic nervous system is again divided into two parts. They are the sympathetic division as well as the next is the parasympathetic division. Now, what is the sympathetic divisions? Its main function is to it mobilizes the body system and fight or flight responses. So, during any type of emergency, etc., now, or any type of stress, etc. And what is the main function of this parasympathetic division? It mainly it conserves the energy, number one, and number two, rest and digest responses. So these are the main two functions of this parasympathetic division. So this is the main divisions of the central nervous system in the tabular form. Now the next part is the central nervous system. Now, this central nervous system, as you know, it consists of the brain and the spinal cord. Now, this it may thus be said that the system is located within a skull, a bony structure, and that is the head. Now, the and a spine, and the this cerebral the brain and the spinal cord, this spinal cord is protected by a spine, a bony structure, and these are the most important parts of the human brain, as these two parts, they control all the mechanisms of the body. Now, they are very delicate structures too. So, they are protected by a bony structure in the head, that is the skull, and the spine. That is, within this spine, this spinal cord actually lies. Now, there is another thing that is the meninges. Now, what is that? Now, there are very delicate structures are there, and very thin structures are present in this portion. And so, these meninges are three thin membranes like soft tissues, and they are just layers of soft tissues, and they actually protect the whole central nervous system and the dura mater, dura matter. Now, dura matter, number one. Number two, the arachnoid or the arachnoid membrane, and number three is the pia matter. So these three regions or soft tissues are protected by this meninges. Now, another protective mechanisms is present in this colorless fluid like structure, and which is known as the cerebrospinal fluid. Now, these terms you will find again and again when you will go study the structures and the functions of the brain also. So as this spinal cord, so you have already known that this meninges and the three matters, that is the pia matter, the arytenoid membrane, and the dura matters, these are some of the soft tissues layers, and it actually protects the inner part of the central nervous system, which is a very delicate part. Now this brain, as we have already studied, that there are some in say for example, in case of any tumor in the brain, so what happens, the fluid accumulates in the ventricles and it causes the walls of the ventricles as well as the brain to expand. Now this condition is known as the hydrocephalus. Now, this hydrocephalus is one type of tumor, and it is cured by removing the tumor and draining out the excess fluid from the ventricle region. Now, this spinal cord, which is another most important part of the human body, so the from the structure we can explain that it is the shape of the spinal cord is oval. Now, why it is oval? Like a cylinder and about 45 centimeter in length. So, in the for say for example, for an average person, not in case of any dwarf or etc. or any giant. Now it is placed within the spinal column, and the spinal cord is a very delicate and structure, and this structure is again protected by the cranial bones and the vertebra that surround it. Now there is a pair of spinal nerves that is attached to this spinal cord at 31 different levels of the spine. Now the pair of the nerves, one is attached to the left and the other one is attached to the right. So this is made like this, that the left side and the right side are protected by this spinal cord, which is an oval in shape. Now this there are two places where it actually bulges. Now at the number one, at the cervical region there is a bulging, and the other at the lumbar region there is a bulging. So there are number of vertebra that surrounds it, and there are two deep grooves in the spinal cord, and in the middle known as the anterior median fissures. Now, and the posterior median sulcus. So there are two regions. They are number one, the anterior median features, and number two, the posterior median sulcus. Sulcus is sulcus. Now there are another nerve roots that actually enters and leave the spinal cord. Now as you know that it is a elongated structure, so the dorsal nerve, it actually, or the nerve root, it helps to send the information from the sensory receptors to the spinal cord. So this is the main function of the that it actually sends the sensory receptor to the spinal cord, and through the spinal cord it goes to the brain. And the ventral nerve root carries the motor information, that means anything related to the movement. So that is the motor information from the spinal cord to the parts of the body. And from the crisscross of the spinal cord, it is evidence that it comprises of two different areas. They are number one, the gray matter and the white matter. Now this inner core, it is a capital H like shape area. It actually comprises of this gray matter, and mostly it constitutes of the cell bodies and the unmyelinated interneurons. Interneurons that you already know, that which connects one neurons to the other, and the surrounding area, it comprises of the white matter, which constitutes the myelinated axon. Now, these are the main structures of spinal cord. Now, what are the functions then? Now, functions of spinal cord, it actually includes it is responsible for simple reflexes that take place in the body, number one. Then the neurons of the spinal cord are responsible for sending any information to the brain, as well as it carries the sensory receptors from the the parts of our body, and it carries or deliver the information to the brain or the muscles or the other glands of the body. So this is another important function of brain. Now, thus it integrates the information coming to and going from the brain and other regions in the body. Now, the next important function of this brain is this spinal cord is a spinothalamic tract. There is a tract, and that is known as the spinothalamic tract, and it includes the axons and that originate from the cell bodies of the neuron located in the spinal cord that end in the thalamus region. Now, while I will explain you the structures of brain, then you will find that there is a structure in the brain, and that is the thalamus. So it is connected with that part of the brain, so it is known as the spinothalamus. Now, these tracts, there are some tracts and which are actually responsible for the sensory functions, including the sensation like touch, pain, or any temperature, etc. And there are major ascending tracts of the spinal cord that actually save the important functions, such as number one, the lateral spinothalamic tract. Then it actually responsible for any type of pain in the body, temperature, or touch, etc. And the anterior spinothalamic tract is involved in any crude touch or any pressure. And this fascicule glacialis is involved in only touch and the conscious kinesthesis. So these are the main functions of this different area, and the major descending tracts of the spinal cord are the lateral and the anterior corticospinal tract, which actually involves all the voluntary movements of our body, like muscle contraction, like of hands or feet, or medial reticulospinal tracts. They have actually inhibitory influence on the motor functioning, etc. Now, this spinal cord also serves another most important function, and that is it is actually the reflex center for many reflexes. So it is the center of the reflex, are where in the incoming sensory muscles are converted to the outgoing motor impulses. So these are the main functions of the spinal cord. Now come to the brain. So brain, as you all know, it is located at the top of the central nervous system, or the CNS, and it is protected by the skull and is interconnected with the body through the brainstem region to the spinal cord. So this brainstem region actually connects with the spinal cord, and all the informations are traveled through this part. Now, this peripheral nervous system, or the PNS, it extends from the brain to the region and throughout the body and back again. It actually sends all or receives the neural signals that provide the information related to number one, pain, pressure, touch, movement, balance, etc. Vision, audition, smell, taste, anything, any type of sensory activities. Now, the cortex or the neurocortex is another seat of this human cognition and the sensory processing. So, you all know that what is the human cognition mean, and we will explore the functional roles of the brain parts in the next session on the next unit. Now, this brain is, if it is sliced, then we can see there are three planes, and these planes resemble to actual slicing done, for instance, at a time. And if we can slice this, then we will find that the three planes are the slicing sideways. If sideways it is sliced, then the number one, the axial slice, number two, the horizontal slice, and the number three, the second slide way is the sagittal slice. This sagittal plane slices the brain vertically from the left side to the right side, and this coronal slice is when the brain is sliced vertically from the front of the brain to the back. So the other related terms are dorsal, indicating the top of the brain, the ventral, it means the bottom of the brain, and the front of the brain is known as the anterior part, while the back of the brain is known as the posterior part. So in this way, we can see the structure of brain if we slice it according to the these three parts. Now, these terms are used to denote where a region in the brain is located, and once we are familiar with this, then it is very easy to locate that these are the real structures of the brain, or the areas that are responsible in this brain area. Now, this as I told you, that the sagittal plane, number one, the another way of slice in the horizontally, that is the axial horizontal plane, the anterior and the posterior. So if we look, the mainly the adult brain is a large organ weighing approximately 1.5 kg, and it is very soft and jelly like substance, and the brain, it keeps growing till one reaches the age of 18 years, and we need proper nutrition for the for the development actually. And this brain is also a delicate organ, and hence it is protected by a hard bony structure which is known as the skull. So this brain is enclosed by the skull, and it is protected, and in the this within this skull region, this soft jelly like substances is present, and this brain is also protected with the help of this meninges and the soft tissue layers that we have already seen in the spinal cord. And the first layer under the skull is the dura mater, which is thick and tough. So as you all know that this actually protects the inner region, so it is thick and tough. The next layer is arachnoid, that means arachnoid membrane, and which is mesh like, soft and spongy like substance. Below this layer is the cerebrospinal fluid, that is the CSF, and the final layer is the pia mater. So these are the layers which actually protects the inner region, and there are four ventricles in the brain. They are, the two large ventricles are present in the middle of the brain, and one in each hemisphere are known as the lateral ventricles. Now this they are actually located in the third and the fourth ventricle, which is located between the cerebellum or the cerebellum and the brain stem. Now, if we come to the main structures of the brain, the upper portion of the brain is the cerebral cortex. and then comes the parietal lobe, which is the inner part of the cerebral cortex. Then another bulging region is located, and which is known as the corpus callosum. It is a white layer, and within this corpus callosum there is a stratum, and which is a red bone, soft region, and there is another gland present just above this cerebellum. Cerebellum is a region which actually is located at the back side of the brain, and here it is just like, or it looks like, the veins of the leaf. And the occipital lobe, it is located just above this cerebellum. And so these are the main functions, or main structures of this brain. Whereas the frontal lobe, it is the upper side of the brain, and the limbic lobe, it is just lies at the middle of the brain. And the optic chiasma, it is it actually the main functions is for the vision. And the there is another important part of the brain, that is the hypothalamus. Then the pituitary gland, two types of glands are present, mainly the pituitary gland in the brain region, just below the hypothalamus, and the pineal gland that I told you. Now, the temporal lobe, it is just above the pons. The after under this pons region, there is a medulla oblongata, and which actually connects to the spinal cord. So these are the main structures of the brain. Now, another different structures, it is divided into three main parts, that is the forebrain, the hindbrain, and the midbrain. So this forebrain, it consists of the structures as the cerebral cortex, the basal ganglia, and the limbic system, the thalamus and the hypothalamus. Now the midbrain, number two, it includes the tectum, the tegmentum structures. And while the hindbrain, it consists of the cerebellum, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Now, the pons and medulla oblongata are the cerebellum, and the cerebellum, they together are known as the brainstem. So, this brainstem are together, this pons, this medulla oblongata, and this cerebellum, together they are known as the brainstem, which are actually connected to the spinal cord. Now, the cerebral hemisphere are situated on the brainstem. Now come to the first part of the brain, that is the forebrain. Now this forebrain has main two divisions, and they are the telencephalon and the diencephalon. Now this telencephalon, it includes the cerebral cortex, number one, number two, the basal ganglia, and number three, the limbic system. Whereas the cerebral cortex, it covers the two central or two cerebral hemisphere, while the basal ganglia is placed in the subcortical area of the brain. Now that this diencephalon, it includes the thalamus and the hypothalamus, the optic chiasma, and the pineal body or the pineal gland. Now come to this telencephalon or the cerebral cortex. Now this cerebral cortex is about 2 to 4 millimeter thick, and it is on the top of the cerebrum, and it is the outer observable part of the brain. So there are millions of dendrites present here, the synapses that we already learned in the neuron chapter, the nervous system, and there are some other neurons too. Now, the presence of these small unmyelinated neurons in the cerebral cortex gives a gray color, and thus it is known as the gray matter. Now, the layer beneath the cortex constitutes of large myelinated axon, which gives a white color, and hence is referred as the white matter. Now there are some other features present here, and the main functions of this region is mainly the sensory functions, and to perform any type of sensory functions like touch, for vision, auditory, etc. Now, the primary visual cortex, it helps in mapping the visual information, and the primary auditory cortex helps to map the auditory information. So this is all about this telencephalon or the cerebral cortex. Next, come to the telencephalon, that is the basal ganglia. Now, this basal ganglia is present under the cerebral cortex, and it is made up of white matter, mostly, which is composed of number of tracts. And there are gray matters present deep inside this cortex, and unlike the white matter. Now, this basal ganglia is made up of the quadrate nucleus. So, there are some nucleus, that is number one, the quadrate nucleus, then the putamen, the globus pallidus, and the amygdaloid nucleus. So, these are some of the names of the nucleus. And the quadrate nucleus and putamen have a stripped appearance, and thus are known as striatum or stratum. Now, being an important part of this cerebrum, the basal ganglia, it actually helps in regulating this voluntary movement or any type of functions related to movement, like movement of hands, movement of legs, etc., movement of any part of our body. And if there is any damage to this region or this blood vessels in this area, it causes a local interruption of the blood flow and causing the tissue damage, and obviously then that patient may have a stroke or cerebral attack. And some other diseases like the Parkinson's disease, that we will study in detail in this unit only. Now, this Parkinson's disease is another type of disease which actually caused by the degeneration of these certain neurons in the midbrain, and sends its impulses to the basal ganglia. Now, this the disease actually, the person experience weakness, several tremors, poor imbalance, or and rigidity of limbs, etc. And this the next part or of this telencephalon is the limbic system, that is the third part. And this this term limbic actually means ring. Now, this limbic system makes a border around this corpus callosum, and it actually connects the left hemisphere with the right one. So, it actually acts like a bridge, and it includes the structure as cingulated gyrus and the hippocampus, which are connected to other areas of the brain as amygdala. Now, these neurons are mainly the septal neurons, the hypothalamus and the thalamus also, they carry this type of neurons. This limbic system is also known as the old brain. Why it is known as old brain? Because it actually performs, or it functions, uh, the functions are related to the emotional experience and expressions, and motivation. That means all these emotional part are controlled by this limbic system area. So this region is known as the old part of the brain. Then it also responsible for any type of emotions like fear, anger, sadness, any type of sexual behavior, fighting, etc. Then comes to the diencephalon. Now this diencephalon thalamus, it is a large region and two lobed structure that is located on the top of the brain stem, and it is the cerebral part of the forebrain, and that has important nuclei known as the geniculate and bodies, and many neurons lie in the nuclei of this thalamus region. Now, this thalamic nuclei have an intermediate position that are involved in relaying some of the informations from the sensory receptor to the motor effectors. So, any damage in this thalamic region may cause coma. That means a person may have some brain dead, or due to some of the problem in this thalamus region, that patient may go into coma. So this diencephalon hypothalamus, there is another part in this diencephalon, and this hypo, as you know, that hypo means, the term hypo means below. So it is located just below the anterior thalamus, so it is known as hypothalamus, and it is a small part of the brain, actually weighing 7 grams only. And it despite its small size, it is functionally very important. It has three important nuclei. What are they? They are the supraptic nuclei, the paraventricular nuclei, and the mammillary bodies. Now the mid portion, they actually gives rise to the stalk known as the infundibulum, that is connected to the posterior pituitary gland. That I told you that there are two glands in the brain. And this hypothalamus is responsible for the survival of as well as the enjoyment of life. And it is the main functions of this is, it actually links the nervous system to the endocrine system, that means the all the glands of our body, and it connects the mind, the psyche, and the body soma. That means it connects the mind with the body. So all the experiences that is observed by the body, that is connected by the body to the mind, that means all the emotions are mainly due to this type of this region of diencephalon, that is a hypothalamus. Now this hypothalamus also, it regulates the autonomic activities, and it integrates all responses made by the autonomic receptors. So it regulates and release of hormones from the pituitary gland, and it functions as the relay center, transferring the information between the cerebral cortex and the autonomic centers. So this is another important part of this diencephalon, that is the hypothalamus, and it is responsible for the all the emotional part. It connects the body or with the psyche or the mind. Now next come under after this forebrain is the midbrain. This midbrain, the middle portion of the brain, is known as this midbrain, and another name of this midbrain is the mesencephalon. Now this has two parts known as the tectum and the tegmentum. Now the midbrain, it is composed of the white tract and the reticular formation, and its function is to transmit impulses between the midbrain and the cerebrum. So there is inferior colliculus, and which serves as the auditory center, while the superior colliculus functions as the visual center. So the main functions are the auditory and the visual, as we have already seen that these are the two important parts, that is the inferior colliculus and the superior colliculus, while the midbrain is also responsible for certain nerve reflexes like the papillary reflexes or the eye movements, blinking of the eyes, etc. Now the next part of this midbrain, as the first part is the tectum. Now the top part of this midbrain is the tectum region. Now it has two colliculi on either side. That means the superior colliculi and the inferior colliculi. So, and the functions of this inferior colliculi is to relay the auditory information, while the function of the superior colliculi is to relay the visual motor system. That means any movement of the eye, movement of the pupil, eyeball, etc. Now, this after this tectum comes the tegmentum. Now, this tegmentum, it lies in the middle of the midbrain, and it includes some parts of the reticular formation, and some extensions that lie in the path between the forebrain and the hindbrain. Now it has two nuclei as a substantia nigra and the red nucleus. So these are the two nucleus, that is the substantia nigra and the red nucleus. Now this red nucleus is involved in all the motor functions, and while the substantia nigra, or the black substance, which is another name of this substantia nigra, it produces dopamine that prevents the Parkinson's disease. Now, dopamine is another, it is a hormone which is also known as a happy hormone. Now, we will study in the endocrine system in the next unit. Now, both are important components of the sensory motor system, and the reticular formation has number of these neurons that are interconnected to one another. Now this network, it serves as a pathway to project the information to the cortex, the thalamus, and the spinal cord. Now then comes the hindbrain, the another part of the brain. As we have already studied the forebrain, the midbrain, and the this is the hindbrain. Now the hindbrain is the posterior part of the brain. It consists of the metencephalon and the myelencephalon. Now this metencephalon, it contains the cerebellum and the pons, while this myelencephalon, it includes only the medulla oblongata. Now this cerebellum, it is the second largest part of the brain, and it also refers as the little brain, and it is located at the base of the skull, behind the pons and below the main part of the brain, and runs directly into the spinal cord. So it is the connected region with the brain and the spinal cord. Now the internal white matter of the cerebellum looks like veins of leaves that I told you, and there are a number of grooves like region which are known as sulci, and the raised areas known as the gyri. So gyri and sulci. Now there are some long and small tracts present in this cerebellum, and that sends actually any type of impulses within to the cerebellum. Now, if this cerebellum is any type of damage occurs in this area due to maybe some accident, maybe some injury, disease, tumor, etc., then what happens? This in say for example, it causes the cerebellar disease that is associated with typical symptoms, and like the person faces problems in moving parts of the body, and the way one wants, then the tremors occurs frequently, then they are unable to walk, etc., or any type of other disturbances in balancing of the body or equilibrium disturbances, etc. Now then comes the pons. It consists of the white matter and the reticular formation. It lies just above the medulla, Now, pons being it means a bridge, that means a connector between the two region, and in fact it serves as a bridge between the cerebellum and the upper part of the brain. So it acts like a bridge, and this pons, the main function of this area is to control the reflexes of the body. It also helps in regulating the respiration of our body, influence sleep, as well as dream and arousal. That means the emotional parts are also responsible for this pons, because the dream, the sleep, these are all, or any type of arousals are responsible for this region. Then comes the medulla oblongata. Now, this medulla oblongata is about an inch in size, and it is located at the top of the spinal cord, and is the lowest part of the spinal cord. It contains some projection tracts in it, and reticular formation also, and the white matter. Now, the nuclei in this reticular formation function as control centers, such as cardiac, vasomotor, or the respiratory control centers, and thus it controls life sustaining function. That means a person is dependent on this medulla oblongata. Why? Because the all the vasomotor or the respiratory control centers, or the main controls or life sustaining functions are controlled by this area. And this medulla has other centers which take care of these non-vital reflexes. What are they? Like vomiting, like coughing, sneezing, etc. So when you will study these the main structures of the brain, then first tell about the definition part, then the nuclei that is present here, then after that the what are the main functions of this area, and if there is any type of disease due to some accidents or tremors, or any type of tumors or disease, then what type of disorders are happen during the damage of this area. So these parts, this type of few parts you have to study when you will study the structures of the brain. Now, this medulla, after this medulla oblongata, the next important part is the lobes of the cerebral cortex. Now, this cortex is the outer covering of the brain, and it consists of tightly packed neurons. So, all the neurons are tightly packed and highly wrinkled, and though initially before birth it is smooth, but with the increase of size and complexity of the brain, the it becomes more wrinkled, and this process is known as corticalization. And this the cortex has again it is divided into two sections. They are the cerebral hemisphere. It is covered by some thick and hard band of neural fibers known as the corpus callosum, whereas this corpus callosum, it enables the left and the right hemisphere to exchange the information with each other and communicate. Then if any type of damage occurs in this region, then the communication part of the person may hampered or disrupted, and each hemisphere acts independently. So one side of the body does something without the other side knowing. So this causes some behavioral changes in the person, some common, that is known as the split brain patients, that you will study in detail in this biopsychology in the later units. And this fissures or grooves in this cortex, they divide the cerebral hemisphere into five lobes. Now these lobes are known as the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, the frontal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the insula. So these are the five lobes that are present in this region, and this insula is hidden from view, though each of them will be I will explain you in the next units or section. Now, so we have covered these main parts of the brain. Now comes to the frontal lobe. Now, as the from the name itself, it indicates the front part. That means the frontal lobe. It is the left and the right part are present in the front of the brain, and the most anterior part of the frontal lobe is known as the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex, it actually helps to receive the any type of sensory information and project it to various portions around it. Now, these frontal lobes are responsible for any type of motor movements or any type of fine movements, like writing, like sewing, or any type of other work with fingers, etc. And there is the precentral gyrus that is involved in the motor functions. Now, if you see that in case of Figus gaze mentioned, like it suffered mainly some due to some damage area of this left frontal lobe, and because of this damage, any type of emotions are not controllable. That means, say a person will go on crying during any sad incidents, or may go on laughing without any rest. Now, this frontal lobe is also involved in this language function region. So, mostly in case of this left frontal lobe, and this area is known as the Broca's area, that you will study also in detail. It is after the name of the French physician Paul Broca. And if there is any damage in this region, or lessons to this Broca's area, then it causes difficulties in producing a fluency in talking, any speech, any sound, etc. And that disorder is known as the Broca's aphasia. Then the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe lie on the either side of the brain at the temples on the lateral sides. A deep grooves known as the lateral sulcus distinguishes the temporal lobe from the other lobes in the cortex. Then there is a gyrus known as the transverse gyrus, that actually serves as a primary auditory area and helps in processing any type of language function, speech, etc. Now, this lobe is also involved in more complex functions as vision, as movement or perception, or facial movement, or recognition of any face, etc. Now, if there is any damage to this region or temporal lobe, then it may give rise to hallucination, and that could be both. It would be both auditory hallucination or visual hallucination. So, this temporal lobe is also involved in emotions and motivational behavior. Now, hence, if there is any damage to this region, it can lead to the Kluver-Bucy syndrome, and this is an apparent in wild monkeys and who do not display fear or anxiety responses. This is all about. Then comes the parietal lobe. These parietal lobes are located at the top and back of each hemisphere, and it lie between the occipital lobe and the central sulcus. So there is a deep groove known as this post central gyrus, that its main function is to the primary somatosensory cortex. Now, this lobe is involved in the sensation like touch. It receives information from the muscle stretch receptors, and these actually helps in the visual and auditory. It helps in sending the information of visual and auditory, mainly information. Then comes the occipital lobe. These occipital lobe are located at the back and base of each cerebral hemisphere. It is responsible for processing of the visual information that is received from the eyes, the primary visual cortex area, that is the Broadman area, 17, and it is involved in perceiving complex visual stimuli. Any damage to this region may leads to problem in vision, in some flashes of light they actually are seen, and visual hallucinations or visual agnosia are mainly some of the symptoms. Now, the next comes the insula. Now, this insula, it is present under this temporal lobe and is hidden from view, and this lobe is responsible for also for vision, and if there is any damage to this area, then there could be some cortical blindness, and extensive damage to this area may lead to, especially in the right hemisphere, may damages the left visual field just crisscross. That means if it happens in the right region, then the left visions are hampered, and vice versa. So the person having the cortical blindness may not be able to perceive the patterns or visual images, and it is known as to be involved in consciousness, in any type of emotions, or regulation of homeostasis and other functions like self awareness, compassion, empathy, etc. So it is another important functions, and mainly the functions are related to the mind or the emotions or the psyche, and then the brain processes it related to the consciousness, the next part. And there are various parts of the nervous system that we have already seen that work together in coordination to make us aware of ourselves, our environment, and the people surrounding us. So this reticular activating system, or the RAS, it conducts the impulses to the cortex, and arousal and human conscious excites it. So this RAS is a network of neurons that are involved in the sensation or the attention process. Now, this RAS, this RAS functions as the arousing system that alerts the body, hence maintaining consciousness, and the three global brain states, awake, sleep, and dreaming, are controlled by this RAS, located in this mesopons. So these states developed and occurred in a predictable manner depending upon the firing properties of the neurons. And this pineal body is placed little above the midbrain. Its main function is regulating the biological clock or rhythm cycles. And this pineal gland produce another melatonin like secretion, and the hormone that helps in this synchronizing the body functions with one another, as well as the regulating reproductive hormones. So for humans and other mammals, it plays an important role in promoting sleep and regulating any cardiac rhythm, etc. Now, then, the disorders of the central nervous system. The main disorders, very common disorder, is the Alzheimer's disease. It is when there is a degeneration process takes place. It actually destroys many neurons in the brain, and it affects the memory, the attention part, the motor responses adversely. And acute immune deficiency syndrome, or AIDS, is sometimes caused by this HIV virus, may infect the neurons that lead to progressive degeneration of the brain. And this sorry, Huntington's disease is another genetic disease that results in involuntary movements that are not desired and may also cause severe dementia and can be fatal. That means the patient may, there is a memory loss of that patient. And so this is one of the important disorders of this central nervous system. Now, another important disease that is well known disease is the Parkinson's disease. It's mainly hampers the movement. It is a movement disorder. And mainly it happens to the or the old age male persons. And the most common symptom is tremor during inactivity, and but not during voluntary movements. Stroke. Now, sometimes an injury may destroy the any type of tissues in the brain and the neurons. It actually involves the motor movement. And the strokes may be caused because of the cerebral hemorrhage, that means bleeding in the brain, or the cerebral ischemia, that means the interruption in the blood supply to an area of the brain. So, in cerebrovascular accident, that is the CVA, the blood flow through the vessels is stopped due to hemorrhage, and this causes a lack of oxygen in the body. And it damages the motor neurons, that the persons are unable to move, or there occurs some partial or complete paralysis. And apart from paralysis, some common results of stroke can be amnesia, can be aphasia, that means language problem, or complete speech problem, and even sometimes coma happens. Then comes the multiple sclerosis. Here it is the autoimmune system and a progressive disorder that attacks the myelin sheath, the protective covering of the axons of the CNS, and the usual onset of the disease is during young age. The common symptoms are mainly visual disturbances, some muscular weakness, tremors, and as well as ataxia. Now, the cause of this immunodisease remain largely unknown. Actually, the causes are still not known, and there is growing consensus that this autoimmune disease likely result from interactions between the genetic and the environmental factors. Then comes the cerebral palsy. It is also a well known a disorder, and it is a common disease that occurs during the childhood. And when there is any damage to the brain tissue due to any infection, any disease, any trauma, or reduced oxygen supply during the birth, etc., and this causes a permanent damage to the movement of the body muscles. The voluntary muscles, it actually controls, is impaired and causes spastic paralysis. The child unable to move, the limbs are difficult to move, and it affects one side of the body also. So this is the cerebral palsy. Then schizoid disorders, it is characterized by sudden burst of schizoids that cause a temporary change in the functioning of the brain, such as changes in consciousness, in motor control, in muscle contraction, etc. And epilepsy is an example of this schizoid, and the frequency and severity of schizoids can be controlled with medication, and prolonged medication is necessary for this type of disorders. Then comes the amnesia. This amnesia is any major loss of the memory while other mental functions are working. Now, this may cause due to some infection in the body, some due to some stroke, tumor, accident, drugs, or loss of oxygen supply, or maybe due to epilepsy, Alzheimer's disease, etc. Now, this amnesia can also be psychogenic, resulting from trauma or hypnotic suggestions. And in the classical case of HM, this amnesia was due to bilateral damage to the medial temporal lobe, and which includes the hippocampus region. So these amnesia also can be of two types. What are they? The anterograde amnesia, that means it refers to the post damage memory deficit, and the retrograde amnesia, it refers to the memory loss immediately before the damage. That means immediately the memory immediate memory before the damage. Now, this is another important disorders of central nervous system which cause amnesia. So that is all about this unit, that is the central nervous system. It carries a vast portion of the structure and the functions of the brain, the functions of the spinal cord, and the disorders of the central nervous system, etc. So, in the next class, I will continue with the next unit of this biopsychology. Before that, go through this unit, and if there is any difficulty, then please let me know so that I can um, explain you again. The next unit is the peripheral nervous system, and in the next class, the it consists of the cranial nerves, and there are some cranial nerves and spinal nerves. So I will go in detail and the functions of this peripheral nervous system, etc. So thank you for listening.